The Cleveland Browns finished their draft weekend, and I want to walk through exactly what they built across days 1 and 2, because the organizational message embedded in these selections is clearer than anything a press conference has communicated, and it speaks directly to what Shedeur Sanders' 2026 environment is going to look like compared to the one that nearly swallowed him whole last year. They didn't draft a quarterback. They drafted weapons. They drafted protection. They drafted the infrastructure that a developing franchise quarterback needs around him to actually develop rather than simply survive. And for a player who spent his entire rookie season operating behind the worst pressure rate in the league with limited receiving support, every single addition on this draft board carries specific weight that goes beyond standard roster improvement. Start with Denzel Boston at pick 39 because this is the selection that changes the pre-snap picture for Shedeur's offense most fundamentally. Andrew Berry went on record in the draft room saying, "Cleveland has been missing a player like this in the AFC North." The specificity of that framing matters. 6'4", 215 pounds, legitimate route runner, 20 touchdowns over his last 2 college seasons. When Berry told Boston on the draft call that he needs to bring bully ball to the perimeter, that language is not incidental. It is an organizational job description that reflects a clear-eyed assessment of exactly what competitive gap this player is being acquired to close. Look at the division Cleveland plays in and what it actually demands. Baltimore has the reigning MVP surrounded by Derrick Henry and Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews. Pittsburgh has DK Metcalf and Michael Pittman. Cincinnati has Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Every team Cleveland has to beat twice a year has a physically dominant outside receiver who changes how defenses must allocate coverage resources before the ball is snapped. Coverage that accounts for those receivers opens opportunities elsewhere. Coverage that doesn't get exploited on the outside. Cleveland has been trying to compete in that specific divisional environment without that specific type of player. Boston is that player now. But the size projection only tells part of the story, and I want to spend real time on the technical dimension of what Boston does as a route runner because it separates this pick from a simple physical upside selection. The film breakdown captured the specific quality precisely. Boston has the patience to manipulate defenders at 6'4" without becoming sloppy at the top of his routes. He gives initial body movement suggesting one direction, stays disciplined in his footwork through the stem of the route, and then exits cleanly into the actual break. That combination, technical precision at the top of routes while carrying a frame that creates physical mismatches at the catch point, is what elite outside receivers actually are, rather than merely look like. The size doesn't come with the sluggishness that large receivers sometimes carry. He's using 6'4" as an advantage in contested situations, while running with the efficiency that smaller, quicker receivers need to create separation at multiple levels. For Shedeur specifically, the practical consequence is that it changes his decision-making options in coverage situations that last season required him to be more conservative than the play was designed for. A 50-50 ball to a receiver with a built-in physical matchup advantage isn't really 50-50. It's a throw Shedeur can make with genuine confidence that the size and catch radius disadvantage he's asking the defender to overcome is real and substantial. Having that option available changes how defenses have to align pre-snap, which opens windows elsewhere that simply didn't exist last year. The offensive line investment on day 2 is the other structural pillar, and Austin Barber at pick 86 is the specific addition I want to address carefully because the Browns' decision to trade back up into the 3rd round to take him off the board communicates something precise about how seriously this organization is treating the protection question. Last season, Cleveland's quarterbacks faced pressure on 39% of dropbacks, the worst rate in the entire league. Pass rushers made contact with the quarterback on more than a quarter of all dropback attempts. Those numbers don't describe a coaching problem or a scheme problem. They describe a structural infrastructure failure. A football environment that was never going to allow a quarterback to develop, to build rhythm, to execute the processing sequence that good offense requires because the protective structure around him was collapsing before plays had a chance to develop. Barber brings depth and the versatility to play multiple positions along the line, which matters enormously for a unit that was rebuilding its entire personnel structure. Spencer Fano was already in the room. Adding Barber behind him gives the organization the assurance that the line doesn't revert to its 2025 version if something goes wrong in front of Shedeur during a season that actually matters for his development. The 39% pressure rate was not going to allow honest developmental evaluation. These picks are the organizational acknowledgement of that reality and the commitment to changing it. Todd Monken's post-game press conference deserves more attention than the specific words he used, because the energy and posture of it are more revealing than any individual sentence. When a reporter tried to pull him back into the Watson-Shedeur-Gabriel conversation immediately after a strong draft night, trying to generate the headline rather than understand what just happened, Monken's response was almost amused rather than defensive. He acknowledged the question, noted that all three quarterbacks showed things he liked in minicamp, and then returned his attention to what the coaching staff is actually focused on. That's a coach who has already processed the quarterback question internally, with enough clarity that the external pressure to verbalize it publicly feels like a distraction rather than a genuine source of uncertainty. The posture of that press conference was different from what Cleveland's coaching staff press conferences have sounded like in recent years. Organizations reflect their internal confidence in how they speak publicly, and what Monken reflected was a staff operating from settled, clear conviction about where the evaluation is pointing and where all of this is heading. The Emmanuel McNeil-Warren safety pick rounds out the organizational message in a way worth acknowledging specifically. The Browns safeties coach came to Barry's office and placed a handwritten note with a big heart and Warren's name on it before the pick was made. That kind of internal enthusiasm, expressed that way and then reflected in a trade-up to take him earlier than his availability required, tells you the defensive investment is genuine and intentional rather than compensatory. Warren has been described as a physical presence and a turnover machine. Forced fumbles throughout his college career, range to find the ball in coverage from multiple alignments. That matters enormously in the context of a young quarterback's development because building a defense that creates short fields and generates possession advantages isn't a secondary organizational priority. It's the foundation that determines whether Shedeur develops in an environment where growth is genuinely possible, where games are competitive and circumstances allow the offense to operate with intention rather than desperation. A quarterback fighting uphill in every game on a defense that cannot create turnovers or field position advantages is a quarterback being evaluated unfairly. Warren is part of changing those conditions structurally rather than hoping they improve by accident. Let me pull back and look at the complete picture of what Cleveland built, because the aggregate message is the one that matters most. A dominant outside receiver who changes how defenses must align pre-snap and creates contested situations that remove matchup difficulty from certain throw windows. Offensive line depth that addresses the structural vulnerability that turned last season into an environment designed to expose a quarterback rather than develop one. A defensive playmaker who brings the ball-hawking quality that helps manufacture the short fields and turnover advantages that allow an offense to operate with controlled intention. And a head coach whose post-game posture communicated complete organizational confidence about where all of it is pointing. Here is the statement this draft actually made, and I want to say it clearly rather than allowing it to remain implicit. If you are Shedeur Sanders watching this draft weekend unfold, and he has been watching because he's been in that building every day during voluntary sessions when others weren't, the organizational message of these selections is as direct as any formal announcement could be. Cleveland passed on adding another quarterback to the competition. They used their premium picks on the specific problems that surrounded their quarterback last season and made honest developmental evaluation impossible. They drafted a receiver who gives him a weapon that every defensive coordinator in the AFC North will have to account for from the moment game planning begins. They invested in the protection structure that gives his processing the time it needs to produce what his talent actually allows. This is what organizational commitment to a quarterback looks like when it's operational rather than rhetorical. It doesn't look like a press conference statement. It looks like the choices made when the draft board offered the opportunity to invest resources differently, and the organization chose not to take it. The Browns don't need to say Shedeur Sanders is their quarterback at this point. They demonstrated it in the decisions they made when other options were genuinely available. That's what believing in a player actually looks like when the transaction record makes it visible. And that record, built across one draft weekend, is now impossible to misread.